The well had been covered for 100 years, until they heard footsteps coming from inside Hook. It had been there for as long as anyone in the village could remember. A round stone well at the edge of the old woods, its mouth sealed shut with heavy wooden beams and iron chains. Moss and ivy had crept up its sides over the decades, swallowing the stones in green. The elders told stories about it, about why it was sealed. No one believed them anymore, or maybe they just didn't want to. But on a cold autumn night, Jacob Klein was walking home from his shift at the mill when he heard it. Faint, deliberate footsteps. Not the sound of something climbing out, but pacing, circling, down there in the dark. At first he froze, convinced it was just the wind or an animal. But the sound didn't fade. It grew sharper, clearer, like bare feet slapping wet stone. Jacob leaned in closer, his breath fogging in the cold air, and that's when the footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a whisper. A voice so soft it could have been mistaken for the wind, except it said his name. By morning, the chains were broken, and the beams that had sealed the well for a century lay scattered in the grass. The villagers gathered, but none dared look inside. They all knew the stories, and they all remembered the warnings. The well had always been part of the village's forgotten history, an unspoken landmark at the edge of the forest. Generations had passed without anyone daring to touch it, the heavy beams and rusted chains standing as a silent warning. Old people told stories about children disappearing, about screams echoing from the depths, about something that wasn't quite human living far below. Most dismissed these tales as folklore, but when the chains lay broken one October morning, people started whispering again. The elders refused to go near it. The younger ones, curious but uneasy, gathered in small groups just far enough to see the jagged hole yawning open. Some swore they could feel cold air rising from it, carrying with it the faintest sound of movement. You're about to hear the full story. A story pieced together from police reports, diary entries, and the trembling words of those who were there. It is a story that still makes the locals avoid that part of the forest, even in daylight. And after hearing it, you might understand why. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss another chilling mystery like this one. Hit the like button if you enjoy stories that blur the line between truth and nightmare. And leave a comment telling me which country and city you're watching from so I know exactly where these stories are reaching. This isn't just a tale about an old well. It's about what happens when the past refuses to stay buried, when the things we lock away find a way to come back. And if you think you'd be brave enough to look inside, you might want to think again. Chapter 1. The first night. The night the well opened, the village felt different. The air was heavy, damp, and unnaturally still, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Jacob Klein couldn't sleep. His tiny house sat at the edge of the trees, and through his thin bedroom walls he swore he could hear faint noises coming from the direction of the well. At first, it was just the wind moving through the leaves. Then came the slow, rhythmic sound, soft, deliberate footsteps. They weren't on the forest floor. No, the sound seemed to rise from below. Jacob sat up in bed, straining to hear. The steps paused. Then, unmistakably, they resumed, circling, pacing like someone trapped in a small space. His mouth went dry. No one had been down that well for a century. No one could be down there. He dressed quickly, lit an oil lantern, and made his way through the moonlit trees. Each step toward the clearing made the sound sharper, more distinct. When he reached the well, the sight stopped him cold. The beams that had sealed it for generations lay splintered on the grass. The chains were coiled like dead snakes beside the opening. The darkness inside seemed to drink the light from his lantern. He leaned closer, trying to see the bottom. That was when he heard it, a voice. It was faint, like a breath carried on cold air, but it was saying something. It was saying his name. Jacob staggered back, nearly dropping the lantern. The forest around him felt wrong, too silent, as if every living thing had retreated. He wanted to run, to put as much distance between himself and that hole as possible. But then the voice called again. This time, it wasn't alone. Multiple voices now, overlapping, whispering in a language he couldn't understand. The sound rose from the depths like an echo from another world. Jacob took one final step back, and the footsteps started climbing. Chapter 2. The descent begins. Jacob didn't remember running home. One moment the whispers were clawing their way up from the depths, and the next he was inside his cabin, bolting the door. He sat in the dark, lantern extinguished, heart hammering in his chest. Outside, the night had taken on a strange, pressurized stillness. It felt like the air was holding something back. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the wood, every brush of branches against the window made him flinch. By dawn, he'd convinced himself it had been a dream, a trick of exhaustion and fear. But when he stepped outside, the truth hit him like a blade to the gut. There were footprints in the frost, bare feet. They led from the forest edge to his front door and stopped there. Word spread quickly. A group of villagers, men armed with shotguns and axes, marched toward the well later that morning. Jacob, against his better judgment, went with them. The clearing was colder than it should have been, the grass slick with a thin layer of frost despite the sun overhead. The well yawned open, darker than black, the air above it carrying the faint smell of damp stone and something sweeter, like rot just beginning to bloom. One man dropped a stone inside. They waited. No splash. No thud. Just a muffled, wet echo that seemed to travel upward instead of down. Then they heard it. The steps. Slow, steady, and impossibly loud, as if the walker was only a few feet below them. A few of the men cursed under their breath. One, an older man named Harris, shouted into the void, demanding to know who was there. The footsteps stopped. For a long, strangled moment, the only sound was the forest breathing. Then, a single knock echoed from somewhere deep inside the stone shaft. Not the sound of stone on stone, but knuckles on wood. It was a signal, an invitation, and something was answering. Chapter 3. The Thing in the Dark. The silence after the knock was worse than the sound itself. It hung in the cold air like a warning. No one moved for a full minute. Even the birds seemed to have vanished from the trees, leaving the clearing in a suffocating stillness. Harris, gripping his shotgun tighter, finally muttered that it was probably just an echo. But Jacob saw his hands, white-knuckled, trembling ever so slightly. One of the younger men, Ethan, took a step forward, peering into the abyss. His voice wavered when he said they should lower a rope and get this over with. Before anyone could object, he was tying a length of rope to a nearby oak, looping it over the old pulley that had once been used to draw water from the well. The others exchanged uneasy glances. Jacob's stomach turned as Ethan slid his legs into the harness and grabbed a lantern. "If there's nothing down there, we can all stop scaring ourselves," he said, forcing a smirk that didn't touch his eyes. The men braced the rope, lowering him slowly. His lantern's glow faded quickly, swallowed by the darkness. 10 feet, 20, 30. Ethan's voice echoed faintly, telling them he could feel the air getting colder. At 40 feet, the light of his lantern flickered violently. "Hold on!" he called up, his tone sharper now. "I think I hear—" The rope jerked, hard. The men above grunted, trying to steady it. But something below pulled with a strength that was not human. Ethan screamed, a sound that cut off mid-breath, replaced by the sickening sound of something wet dragging across stone. The rope went slack. His lantern hit the stone with a hollow clink. The light snuffed out instantly. Harris shouted his name, his voice breaking, but the only reply was a slow, deliberate knock, just like before. No one moved to retrieve the rope. The smell rose then, foul, metallic, with a strange sweetness beneath it, like rotting flowers. It wrapped around them, coating their throats, making several gag. Jacob's mind raced. If they left now, they could pretend it had never happened, but some part of him knew it was too late. The well was awake. Whatever had been trapped for 100 years was moving freely again. They backed away in silence, the rope still hanging limp over the pulley, swaying slightly as if something far below was breathing. And though no one admitted it out loud, they all heard the final sound as they left. Footsteps. Slow, steady, and climbing. Chapter 4. When the rope moved. The village tried to pretend. Doors that were never locked before now wore heavy iron latches. Curtains that once let in morning light stayed drawn even at noon. By dusk, chimneys breathed smoke like anxious sighs. Jacob sat at his table, a cup of untouched tea cooling at his elbow, listening. Beneath the crickets and the far-off river, something new had joined the night. A slow cadence, not quite rhythm, not quite random, like a thought taking steps. Harris came after sunset, hat in his hands, eyes red from a day without blinking. He didn't sit, he stood in the doorway like a man who might have to run again. "We leave it," he said. "We tell no one from the next town, no sheriff, no priest. We ride this out." Jacob stared at him. "We already lowered one of ours," he said quietly. "What do we tell his mother?" Harris swallowed. "That he fell, that the rope broke." His voice faltered, "that no one heard him." At midnight, the wind died. The trees lost their language. Jacob and Harris stepped into the road with lanterns hooded to slits. The well clearing loomed ahead, a dark against the field. Even from 50 yards they could smell it, the same sweet metal stench, heavier now, as if the earth itself had begun to rot from the hole outward. The rope still hung over the pulley, motionless, a pale line in the gloom. Jacob felt the tightness in his chest ease a fraction. Not moving, it moved. Not a sway from breeze. There was no breeze. A tug, the kind that travels through rope into bones. Then another, slow and patient, like someone testing the weight above. The pulley whispered, iron against iron. Jacob's lantern snapped open without him meaning to, light spilling across the stones. The beam kissed the rope and stopped dead where the fibers darkened, wet as though freshly pulled from a river. Except what washed a river did not smell like flowers left too long in a sick room. Harris reached for the line. Jacob grabbed his wrist. "Don't." The older man's face worked through possibilities, bravery, duty, denial, then settled into something too tired for any of them. "We cut it," he said. "We cut it and run, and let the whole be the whole." Jacob nodded. He took out his knife, thin as a confession, and stepped to the rope. The first sawing bite raised fibers like hairs. The second drew that wetness onto the blade. It wasn't water. It clung. When the rope parted, it didn't fall. It rose, as if slack were being pulled from below, hand over patient hand. The free end slid through the pulley and vanished into the hole with a whisper like silk over stone. Harris stumbled back, crossing himself so fast he smudged it halfway across his chest. The sound that answered from below wasn't a footstep. It was a laugh too quiet to be heard and too loud to be doubted, felt more than listened to, vibrating in teeth. They fled, not like men chased, but like men who know the road home will not remain a road if they look behind. At Jacob's door, Harris caught his sleeve. "If it knocks," he whispered, "do not answer." Then he added softer, "If it says my name, it is not me." He left without waiting for Jacob's promise. Jacob stood in the doorway until the stars decided to come back to the sky. Sleep never arrived. The night thinned toward morning, a grey seam opening over the trees, when the first knock sounded at Jacob's window. Not the sharp rap of knuckles, but the slow press of a palm. Glass bowing in, releasing, bowing again. He lifted the lantern. A print bloomed on the pane, clear as frost. Not a hand, a foot. Toes splayed, skin ridged where stone had taught it a new way to walk. It pressed once more, then slid down, leaving a snail trail of that almost sweet film. Voices collected on his porch. Not speaking exactly, practicing. A syllable repeated, softened, reshaped until it resembled a name. Cobb, the way a child learns to whistle. His throat closed. He backed toward the inner room and, against every rule the village had ever kept, opened his bedroom door, the one that faced the back path to the well, so he would hear if the latch lifted. He leaned the shotgun against the frame and sat on the floor, listening to his own breath stitch itself ragged. Just before dawn, silence fell so complete it erased the memory of sound. Then 3 taps on the back door, measured like a judge. Jacob's hand slid to the shotgun. "Who is it?" The words left him without permission. No answer, only the turning of a new sound in the hinge, like a tongue testing a tooth. He held his breath until his eyes watered. The latch shivered once, twice, then stopped. From the threshold, something retreated with the light steps of someone who knows the house and is being polite. Morning did not bring comfort, it brought proof. Bare prints led from the back stoop to the trees. Small, large, human, not. Some overlapped as if an argument had been held on the frost. At the path bend, a deeper impression sank where something heavy had stood a long time, listening. Jacob followed the trail as far as the old split trunk, where it divided. One branch toward the well, one toward Harris's place. He chose the second with a dread that felt like obedience. Harris's door stood open a finger's width. The house smelled of coffee gone cold and the ash of a fire that had decided it would not help. "Harris!" Jacob called, and the name lost courage halfway through the room. On the table sat a mug, and beside it a circle of damp ringed with grit, stone dust, fine as flour. It trailed from the door to the bedroom like someone had carried a mouthful of the well inside and dripped it thoughtfully. Jacob followed it to the threshold he did not want to cross. Harris lay on the bed, boots on, hat still crooked where a man puts it in a hurry. His chest rose and fell. Jacob exhaled. Not gone, not yet. He stepped close, reached out, and froze. Harris's eyes were open, focused on the ceiling with a tenderness Jacob had seen only at wakes. "Don't let it learn your shape," Harris said, voice thin with sleep he had not chosen. "It walks better in borrowed bodies." His hand found Jacob's wrist and squeezed once. "Tonight, we nail the lid." He did not say which lid. The wells, the coffins, the village's mouth. Jacob left as the sun finally tore itself up over the pines. In the clearing, crows gathered on the well's rim in a black wreath. They faced inward, heads cocked as if listening to a sermon from a priest below. When Jacob took a step, every bird turned to him in the same heartbeat, beaks shining wet. One hopped to the stones, dropped something at his feet, and flew. It was a knot from the rope, tight, slick, and pulsing faintly, as if remembering a hand. He did not touch it. He did not breathe. That afternoon, the elders met in the church basement, where the floor still held the cool of last winter. They spoke of concrete and iron grids, of salt and prayers remembered wrong. Jacob watched their mouths try to shape a century of fear into a plan, and understood the problem wasn't the hole. It was the stairs he heard in his head, climbing every time the room went quiet. When the meeting ended, someone asked, "Who stands first watch?" No one answered. The question didn't need one. The footsteps from the well had already set the schedule. Tonight they would come to learn more names. And the village would learn how to pretend silence is courage. Chapter 5. The First Watch. They chose Jacob because he had already seen too much. That was how it was justified, though no one said it directly. Harris, still pale and sweating from his encounter, sat in the back of the church basement and didn't raise his eyes. The elders handed Jacob the lantern, the old rifle, and a chair. "Stay until the moon's at the highest point," one of them muttered. "If nothing happens, you leave. If something does, don't open your mouth." The meaning was clear. What came out of the well had to remain unanswered. The night was windless, and the clearing felt wrong, as if the forest itself had retreated a few feet back. Jacob set the chair 10 paces from the well, facing it directly. The lantern burned low, casting a weak halo over the cracked stones. The rope was gone. Only the pulley remained, swaying gently as though remembering a weight. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called once, then went silent, as if realizing it had spoken in the wrong place. For the first hour, nothing moved. Jacob's mind replayed the stories the elders used to whisper to frighten children into obedience. About the brothers who vanished in 1864. About the dog found headless at the well's rim. About the night the water turned the color of ink and stayed that way for a month. He'd never believed them. But the smell that rose now, a faint sweetness undercut by metal, made those stories feel less like warnings and more like history lessons. A sound broke the stillness. Drip, drip, drip. Not from the well, but from the stones around it. Jacob leaned forward. In the lantern's glow, he saw moisture beading on the rock, sliding down in dark streaks. The droplets pooled at the base and vanished between cracks, as though the ground were drinking. He told himself it was condensation. His gut told him it wasn't. Then the footsteps began, slow, deliberate, far below. Each one was followed by a soft scrape, like bare skin over stone. Jacob stood, rifle ready, heart in his throat. The sounds grew closer, rising through the shaft. He could almost picture the thing climbing, not quickly, not struggling, but taking its time, as if it knew the night belonged to it. When the sound stopped, the silence was heavier than before. Jacob forced himself to step closer. He peered over the rim, lantern extended. Blackness swallowed the light after a few feet, but in that moment, he saw movement, pale and glistening, like knuckles turning in slow circles. His stomach lurched. From the darkness came a whisper, not words, not exactly, but the shape of words, a mimicry. It tried his name, failing on the C so it sounded almost like Jacob. The voice was wet, each syllable sticking to the next. The thing below shifted again, and this time something reached up. Long, thin fingers tipped not with nails, but with something that reflected light, like wet stone. They brushed the inner wall of the well as though testing it. Jacob backed away, but the voice followed, growing clearer. Cold, up here, it said, each word more human than the last. Warm, down, here. The invitation slid into him like a hook. He raised the rifle, but his hands were shaking. Shooting into the well felt like shooting into a grave. The thing didn't climb higher. It simply stayed there, breathing, waiting. Then, without warning, the fingers withdrew. The sound of retreating steps spiraled downward into silence. The moisture on the stones began to dry, leaving only faint streaks of residue. Jacob stood rooted for what felt like hours before realizing the moon had already begun to sink. The shift change was due. When Harris arrived, he found Jacob pale, trembling, and silent. "Did it come?" Harris asked. Jacob shook his head slowly. "No," he lied, though his mind was still replaying the sound of that wet, half-formed voice. Harris didn't press. He simply sat in the chair, lantern in hand, and Jacob walked away without looking back. But as Jacob reached the edge of the clearing, he thought he heard it again. Not from the well, but from the trees behind him. His name, clear this time, and it was laughing. Chapter 6. What Harris Heard. Harris lasted 30 minutes before the quiet started talking. It wasn't sound at first. It was pressure, like the air thickening until each breath had to squeeze past something unseen. The lantern flame drew thin and blue, trembling in the draftless clearing. He told himself it was age, nerves, the long shadow of Ethan's scream. Then the pulley ticked, one dry click that didn't belong to wind or rust or memory, and he felt the hairs on his forearms rise like wheat before a storm. He leaned over the rim with the caution of a man peering into his own grave. The stone was cold enough to bite his palms. No light would hold. It soaked into the shaft like spilled ink. At first there was nothing. Then the smell came. Wet iron, wilted violets, the slick sweetness he now knew by name without language. It climbed faster than sound, and with it something else, faint as a picture, whispered through a wall. A woman humming, 5 soft notes. Stop, repeat. The tune he had heard once, long ago, when his wife still burned a yellow kitchen lamp after midnight. Harris! The voice rose with the humming, not beneath it but braided through, as if the song itself had learned a mouth. He shut his eyes. He knew what Jacob had warned. If it says my name, it is not me." When he looked again, a small shape had appeared on the lip of the well, a wet print the size of a child's heel, toes splayed, pointing toward him. It darkened the stone, then paled, then darkened again, as if pressing and lifting, practicing the act of standing. "Not tonight," he said, surprising himself with the steadiness of his tone. "You can knock until Sunday." He backed the chair 2 paces without turning. The humming stopped. Something scraped inside the shaft, a slow spiral like fingernails, writing a letter around the inner wall. Harris pictured it circling, counting rings in the mortar, the way a man counts steps in the dark. When the scraping ceased, the night fell flat again, emptied of everything but his pulse. He made it to dawn. He told himself that later, when his hands wouldn't unclench. He left the clearing with the lantern down-dimmed and the chair tucked beneath his arm. Proud in the stupid way men are when nothing kills them quickly, the path delivered him to his porch steps and then did not remember how to be a path. He halted. The doormat was missing. In its place lay the rope knot Jacob had refused to touch, slick and pearled with dew that wasn't dew. Something had arranged it carefully, dead center, like a calling card from a precise acquaintance. Inside, the house held last night's shape. 2 cups in the sink, the poker resting against the hearth, the hat he'd failed to hang. He set the lantern down and heard water. Not a drip, water moving as if someone were running a bath in the back room. He did not have plumbing. He followed the sound past the kitchen and into the short hall that ended at the pantry door. The seam of wood where the latch met the jamb glittered wet. He touched it. His fingertip came away with a clear film that clung like sap and smelled like the well. He opened the door. Shelves, jars of peaches asleep in syrup, nothing else. The sound persisted, not from the pantry but below it. The house had a crawl space, low and mean, entered from a trap that hadn't been lifted since last winter. He crouched, worked the ring free, and lifted. Cold rose out of the dark like a hand. In the rectangle of dimness, he saw footprints in the dust, bare, small, recent, stampeding in circles that crossed and recrossed until the floor looked like scribble. One print stopped at the ladder, toes pointed up, as if a child had considered the climb and changed its mind about the world. "Harris?" The voice was wrong because it wasn't wrong enough. It wore the weight of his wife's sleep, the burr of her morning throat. "Without meaning to," he answered. "Helen?" The word crowded the air and had nowhere to sit. Silence followed, expectant and patient. He shut the trap and slid the coal scuttle over it. Ridiculous, ceremonial. He stood until the house forgot him and then remembered one creak at a time, where it put men when they were young and where it keeps them when they are old. By afternoon he was back at Jacob's with the knot wrapped in brown paper. "It came to the porch," he said, and Jacob did not ask what it meant anymore. They unwrapped the thing like it might bite. The fibers pulsed faintly under touch, a slow throbbing that never matched their own hearts, as if counting down from a number too large. "We have to seal it again," Jacob said. "Concrete, iron, salt." Harris nodded because those were nouns that sounded like verbs. Action, barriers. He did not say the well had learned to walk around barriers. The elders agreed to a second watch, a third, a week of them. Rules were written in chalk on the church blackboard, like commandments invented at a kitchen table. Do not speak first. Do not lean over the rim. Do not bring the dead their names. They assigned pairs, then, in a moment of coward's wisdom, changed to singles. Fewer names to learn. Harris took the midnight to 2. Jacob took the 2 to dawn. "We'll nail the lid," Harris said again, meaning it this time with a fervor that cracked his voice. "You bring nails," Jacob answered. "I'll bring the part of me that still believes." Harris arrived early for his shift and found the chair already set and the lantern lit, though Jacob had not yet come. In the light's thin circle lay something he recognized and did not. His wife's hair ribbon, blue turned grey by years, tied in a bow with a knot he alone used, the little hitch she teased him for. He reached to pocket it and stopped when the ribbon twitched. Not wind, a tightening. It drew itself toward the rim a finger's length, then stilled, like a fish reconsidering the hook. He sat. He did not touch the ribbon. He let the well be the well, and watched the moon hold itself halfway up the trees. For a while, he believed in weather, in owls, in the ordinary grip of cold on bone. Then the footsteps began again, but not from below. From the trees behind him, slow and close, unhurried as Sunday shoes. He did not turn. He did not breathe large. He fixed his eyes on the circle of stones and tried to be a stone. When the steps reached his shoulder, the voice that leaned beside his ear wore his own mouth. "Harris," it said kindly. "Look." He kept looking forward. The ribbon slid another inch toward the breath at the bottom of the well, and the lantern flame went thin as a needle. Chapter 7. The Second Descent. By the seventh night, the air around the well felt different, charged, like the thick pause before a thunderstorm. The men rotated shifts, but the unease in their eyes betrayed that each was carrying the same thought. Whatever was inside had grown restless. The rope, the chair, the lantern, they had become less like tools and more like offerings, placed before something that watched and waited. Jacob arrived for his turn to find the rope already hanging into the darkness, swaying as though someone had just let it go. No one else was supposed to be here. The forest behind him was silent, but not with peace. It was the kind of silence that happens when every living thing knows a predator is near. He called out softly, "Harris," but his voice seemed to fold into the dark, swallowed before it could return. Then came the sound, a slow, deliberate creak from deep inside the shaft, like the ancient pulley turning under its own will. The rope slid an inch, then another. Jacob's heartbeat drummed in his ears as he gripped the wooden rim. Against every warning, every vow they'd made, he leaned over. The light from his lantern barely touched the interior, but he saw something. A figure far below, unmoving, staring upward. It wasn't Ethan. It wasn't anyone he knew. Its proportions were wrong, too tall in the torso, arms that dangled past the knees. Even at that distance, Jacob could see its mouth, a black oval, not open in a scream, but in a smile. A voice floated up the shaft, warped and stretched, as if climbing through water. "Lower it down." No name, no plea, just a command, patient and confident. The rope twitched in his hands, as though something below had already taken hold. Jacob staggered back, forcing himself to drop the rope. But before it could settle, the pulley spun violently, feeding the line down into the dark at a speed no human could control. The end snapped from his grasp and vanished, the wood above groaning in protest. Then silence. For a full minute, Jacob didn't move. He was afraid that if he did, the rope would come back, not empty, but bearing something that had no business in daylight. When he finally stepped back, his boot struck something. He looked down and froze. It was Harris's lantern, the one he had taken home the night before. The glass was cracked, and inside, instead of a wick, there was a single wet footprint pressed into the soot, bare, small, and pointing toward the well. He didn't remember walking back to town. He didn't remember shutting his own door, but hours later, as the sun was rising, he woke in his bed to the sound of the rope pulley creaking. Not outside, not at the well, in the hallway, behind his bedroom door. Chapter 8. Behind the door. The creaking of the pulley was steady now, as if someone or something was lowering a burden in slow, deliberate intervals. Jacob lay frozen, his mind screaming that the sound could not be in his hallway, that it belonged to the clearing, to the stone well, to the forest. And yet there it was, coming from behind the thin wooden door that separated him from the rest of his home. The smell hit him next, damp earth, cold and metallic, as though the ground had been freshly turned. It seeped under the door, thick enough that each breath felt like swallowing soil. He swung his legs off the bed, feet sinking into the floorboards that seemed softer than they should be, like wood gone wet. The lantern on his nightstand trembled slightly, though there was no breeze. He took the rifle. Its weight was comforting in his hands, but also a reminder that it had done nothing the last time he'd faced the thing from the well. Slowly, he turned the handle. The door resisted for a heartbeat. as if something on the other side had been leaning against it. When it opened, the hallway was wrong. The walls were damp, the wallpaper curling and blackened with mold. The pulley hung from the ceiling beams, a frayed rope vanishing into the darkness above, where the roof should have been. Each creak of the wood overhead matched a faint sound beneath his feet, drips hitting water far below. Then the rope moved. Something was coming down. At first it looked like a bundle wrapped in rotting canvas, twisting gently as it descended. The air grew colder, the smell sharper. As it spun, Jacob saw the outline of hands pressing outward from inside the bundle, fingers stretching the fabric until they tore through. The bundle stopped mid-air, suspended at chest height. Slowly, the fabric slid away, falling to the floor with a wet sound. What remained was not a person, not exactly. Its skin was pale and bloated, the eyes milk-white and wide, fixed on him with unnatural stillness. The mouth opened, water spilling from it in slow streams. "Come back," it said, not a plea, not a command, but something in between. The voice was wrong, layered, as though a dozen mouths were speaking through one throat. "It's warmer there." Jacob stumbled backward, his boot landing in the fallen fabric. The texture was slick cold, not cloth at all, but something organic, something that seemed to pulse faintly in his grasp. The figure swayed on the rope, its face splitting into a grin far too wide, revealing darkness where a throat should be. Without thinking, Jacob fired. The shot shattered the silence, but did not stop the swaying. Instead, the figure began to ascend again, rising into the ceiling darkness, still grinning, still watching. The rope vanished, the pulley stilled, and then silence. But when Jacob looked down at his hands, they were wet, not with water, with soil. Chapter 9. The mark on his hands. Jacob sat on the floor for what felt like hours, his breathing shallow, his gaze locked on his palms. The soil clung to him as if it had sunk into his skin, black under his nails, smeared into the lines of his hands. It wasn't normal dirt. It was darker, heavier, almost oily, and it carried the same metallic sweetness that had wafted from the well. He stumbled into the kitchen, scrubbing at the sink until his knuckles turned raw, but the smell lingered. No matter how much soap he used, the dark stain clung stubbornly, almost as though it wasn't on his skin, but inside it. When he finally looked up from the basin, the small mirror above it reflected something that made him freeze. Behind him, just over his shoulder, was the rope. It swayed lazily, as though stirred by a wind he couldn't feel. He spun around. Nothing. The hallway was empty. The air was still. But in the mirror, the rope continued to swing, and now there was something else. A shadow just beyond the doorway, tall and narrow, its edges blurred like smoke. He couldn't move. His reflection seemed stuck, eyes locked on the shadow's slow, steady movement toward the rope. Then it gripped the line with long, bone-thin fingers and began to pull, not down but up, as though retrieving something from below. The mirror darkened, the silver backing warping like boiling water. The kitchen light flickered. The sound came next. The same wet, dragging noise he'd heard the night Ethan disappeared. It wasn't in the mirror anymore. It was in the house. Jacob grabbed the rifle again, backing toward the front door. His heart hammered as he reached for the knob, but the moment his hand touched it, the wood beneath his feet creaked, not with the weight of his own step, but from something directly beneath him. Slow, deliberate, moving toward him from under the floorboards. The air grew colder, his breath visible. Then a voice rose from below, muffled by the wood, but still clear. Not far now. Jacob bolted outside, into the freezing night. The moon was high, but its light felt dim, smothered by a haze. He didn't stop running until the well clearing came into view. The rope was gone, the pulley still. But on the stone rim, where the moss had been thick for decades, someone had traced a perfect handprint, dark soil, the same as what stained his skin, and beside it, smaller, almost childlike, was a second handprint. Chapter 10. What the Well Released. The smaller handprint seemed to burn in Jacob's mind, more unsettling than the larger one. It wasn't just the size, It was the placement, the way it sat slightly inside the bigger print, like a child holding an adult's hand, a grotesque mimicry of something safe. He circled the well slowly, rifle raised, the forest pressing in around him. The air here was heavier than in town, colder, as if the ground itself were drawing heat away from him. His boots scraped on the old stones, each sound swallowed almost immediately by the thick night air. Then came the noise, deep, deliberate thuds from inside the shaft, like something climbing an invisible ladder. A faint vibration passed through the stones under his hand, and the rope, which hadn't been there moments before, uncoiled slowly from the pulley. It didn't drop, it fed upward, vanishing into the dark above like there was no sky at all. Jacob leaned over the edge, lantern in hand. The light caught the wet walls as they receded into endless black, but there, 30 feet down, something shifted. A pale face turned upward far too quickly and held his gaze. The eyes were wide, but they weren't human. They shimmered like wet glass, reflecting his own lantern flame back at him. "Time to come home," the voice echoed, this time closer, sharper, resonating through the stone like a tuning fork. Jacob stepped back, but the ground beneath his boots trembled. Hairline cracks formed in the mossy rim, and a low groan rose from below, wooden, stone, and alive. A black, glistening hand shot up from the dark, slamming into the rim, claws gouging the stone. Another followed. They were too long, the joints bending wrong, the nails curling like hooks. The thing pulled itself higher, its face emerging fully now. It wasn't the bloated corpse from before. This was leaner, sharper, and smiling wide enough to split its cheeks. Behind it, pressed against the wet wall of the well, a small, pale figure clung to its back, its head resting on the larger one's shoulder, like a sleeping child. The small one's eyes were shut, but its mouth hung open, letting water spill endlessly onto the larger creature's neck. Jacob didn't remember pulling the trigger, only the deafening report of the rifle and the recoil slamming into his shoulder. The shot shattered part of the creature's jaw, but it didn't scream. It only stopped climbing and smiled wider. The rope above him jerked violently, and Jacob realized it wasn't attached to the pulley anymore. It was attached to him. Coarse fibers burned into his wrist as something unseen pulled. He dropped the rifle, clawing at the knot, but it only tightened. The pull grew stronger, dragging him toward the rim. The smaller figure's eyes opened. They were entirely black. Jacob's last thought before the stone rim met his chest was that he was not going to fall into the well. The well was going to close over him like a mouth, and once it did, no one would ever know where he had gone. When dawn broke over the forest, the clearing was empty. The well was sealed with a fresh stone slab, no moss on it at all, and in the dirt nearby, 2 sets of footprints, one large, one small, led away from it into the trees. The forest held its breath. Not a single leaf shifted. The air was dense, carrying the scent of damp stone and something faintly metallic. Where Jacob had stood, the earth showed only a distorted outline, soil pressed in unnatural patterns, as if something had molded it from beneath. The slab sealing the well looked ancient, yet its edges were raw, the grooves still oozing dark moisture. Moss clung to the stone in thick veins, pulsating faintly in the dim light. Anyone foolish enough to touch it would have felt the irregular depressions carved into the surface. 2 distinct impressions. One broad, the size of a man's hand. One small, narrow-fingered, almost delicate. And just along the rim, so faint it seemed to disappear when you looked directly at it, was a third mark. The fingers were impossibly long, the tips ending in deep gouges that scraped the stone as though they had tried to climb back inside. Whatever had left it wasn't gone. It was waiting,